Thank you for tuning into Roach Radio, your one-stop shop for all your niche music needs. I'm your host, Roach, and today we're going to be talking about one of the most bleakest genres in metal history, black metal. Now, before we get started, I want to thank three people real quick. My roommates for getting me this awesome shirt. Ween, Bananas and Blow, check them out. Great song, great band. And I'd also like to thank my mother for sewing my patches onto my vest. Some of you will say, Braden, that's not very metal of you. I built her a house and she sewed my patches on. I think that's a pretty fair trade. I'd also like to say that I will be holding my microphone for this because we had a bit of a hiccup with the equipment closet. No worries though. I also don't have a monitor, so if I'm out of focus, not a bash on the equipment closet, but anyway. Now before we get started, I'd also like to say that I'm going to be tackling some very dark subject matter. If you're very squeamish, if you don't like talking about murder, suicide, or taboo religious talks, I'd recommend watching a different video, maybe my other video. But without further ado, let's get started with the Norwegian satanic panic of the 90s. So the story has a lot of weird twists and turns that require a lot of context for previous events. So I'm just going to go ahead and start with the beginning. In 1987, a 19-year-old boy named Oystein Arseth, also known as Euronymous, along with his other bandmates named Maniac, Necrobutcher, Hellhammer, Messiah, and Konrad Schnitzler, I think that's how you say that name, created Death Crush under the band name Mayhem. Now, I'm not going to say that I think this was the first black metal album because I don't think it was. I think it's more of a death metal album, but that's just me. It's a very uneducated opinion because I don't listen to death metal all that much, but I do listen to black metal. But regardless, this album started a lot of stuff. Euronymous claimed it and him to be what birthed true Norwegian black metal. And black metal is pretty much just... Here's a clip of black metal. Hopefully I don't get flagged for it, but here you go. The production quality is bad, low fidelity. We've talked about that before. Very bleak lyrics. Unpleasant times in general. But I still like it. Like, I don't know. Like, I don't know. There's just something about it I like. But this band just was not happy with their lead singer, so they got a new one. Euronymous sent out letters to people who knew around the world, and one person replied named Pelle Olin from Sweden. And he replied with a one of those vanilla envelopes. I'm not sure how you say that word. Envelopes that had a letter saying his situation, what's going on, a cassette tape demo of his vocals, and a crucified mouse. So Mayhem listened to the vocals, and they were like, yo, that's stellar. And they were like, get over here. And in 1998, Per Olin moved to Norway. Now, at some points, I'm going to call him Pelle. At some points, I'm going to call him Per. As far as I know, one of those is his real name. I know Per is one of his names. I see that one everywhere. I hear Pelle a lot. That's another thing. A lot of this information may not be true. There's a lot of shrouded information. A lot of information is shrouded in mystery. That's what I wanted to say. That sounds like a black metal song. Now, of all the people to be involved with this story, Per was the most interesting. And I'm just going to quickly cover why. So when our boy was younger, he was bullied and was beaten up so bad that he was clinically dead for a few moments. From that point on, after he woke up, because he was revived, he never truly felt like he woke up. He felt like a walking corpse. And this was a mental disorder known as Cotard syndrome, where the person believes they're not alive. They're a walking corpse. Essentially, he doesn't believe he ever got up from that hospital bed. He had a crazy obsession with death. He dreamt of Transylvania. He had very graphic and gruesome drawings. Not really gruesome, but just scary detailed. You know what I mean? Like, look at that. He would have dead animals under his bed to become familiar with the stench of death. Before concerts, he would have dead animals in a bag and huff them like one would huff glue. And he would even bury his stage clothes a couple days before the concert so as to have a rotting feel. I'm not really sure what the word he would have used, but rot was. Pear was a very depressed person. He self-harmed a lot. He would cut himself so vigorously to the degree where he had to be held down while he was at a party until the paramedics showed up. But this didn't stop when he was on stage. He would cut himself while he was singing on stage and spray the blood out into the audience. And the audience loved it. Black metal invokes just dark imagery. A lot of the stage performances, a lot of the imagery it provokes, a lot of ideas it brings up really came from Pella. And he also, I don't know if it was him, Euronymous, or someone else I'm just completely forgetting, but it is said that he is the one who started corpse paint. Now, I'm sure you've seen a lot of other people use corpse paint, but this is where it came from. This is what it was used for. So this behavior, this obsession with death, all these emotions eventually earned him the nickname Dead. You might have mentioned me say Euronymous. I suppose now is a good time to get into the whole moniker situation. Euronymous, his real name's Oystein. Oystein Arseth, but he goes by Euronymous because that's what they do in black metal for some reason. Pelle Olin, Dead. I'll get into some other ones in a little bit. Now, there's no clear timeline as to when all this happened, but around when Per moved to Norway, Oystein bought something called Mayhem House, which was a house outside of Krakstad, which was outside of Oslo, which is a big town. It's the capital, I believe, but I could be wrong. At Mayhem House, people lived there, people recorded, partied. Anyone who really associated them was at Mayhem House. I am so sorry. As far as I know, Per was the only one who lived in this house. One of the guys that came to this house was Christian Vikernes, also known as Varg. Now, there are witness testimonials that say Varg purposefully left ammunition for Pella's shotgun that he had at the house for Pella's shotgun, like for him. And there's also testimonials that say that Euronymous purposefully left Pella alone at the house for days at a time so that his depressive episodes would grow and fester until he would snap. And on April 8th of 1991, he did. These are bad people. Varg and Euronymous were obsessed with Dead's ideology, his philosophy, his obsession with death. And it drove them to encourage Pella to commit suicide. I will spare you the details, but it's just a Google search away. Just look at your own discretion. Now, the first one to discover Pella's body was Euronymous. And he didn't call the cops, didn't call the ambulance, didn't call his friends. He went to the store, got a disposable camera, went back to Mayhem House and took pictures of Per's dead body after rearranging the scene. Hellhammer later on developed and exposed the photos, and Euronymous would later on use one of the photos as cover art for an album called Dawn of the Black Hearts. It was a live album. If you look it up, you'll find it, but just know that when you look it up, you are going to be seeing a real dead person's body. You're going to be seeing Per Olin's body. Look at your own discretion. Such a fun and lighthearted video. So this was obviously a shock to the Black Circle. Mayhem House was abandoned, but Oystein did what any man would do, and he bought a shop and turned it into a record store called Helvete, which is a Norse word, which is a Norwegian word, which is also a Norse term for hell and hell's punishments. I think I got that right. Now, beneath this record store, Helvete, which I realize now is very ironic, was this cave-like basement, which was where the Black Circle formed. Now, nothing really big happened in this cave. A lot of conceptualization went about, like talking about what they would do, but no rituals took place. Despite the fact that they will say they did do that, that didn't happen. Some of the few among this Black Circle was, I gotta pull up the names, Oystein Arseth, Euronymous, Christian Varg Vikernes, Gilv Fenris Nagel, Bard Faust Eithine. So Euronymous owned and lived at this record shop. He also only sold records that he approved of in terms of production and message, which probably just meant he just sold music he liked. But this, coupled with the fact that he did not know how to own and run a store and distribute its funds, it closed down within the 2 years. But it wasn't just because of bad management. That's why the store closed down. It wasn't just bad management. We're going to talk about Varg. Christian Varg Vikernes hated Christians. So he had his name legally changed to Varg. He was the only one who had his name legally changed to something else. Now, his hatred for Christians roots in the fact that Norway was originally a pagan nation. They believed in Thor, Odin, Loki, Freya, those gods, paganism. It was a pagan nation until, in his words, the Christians came and destroyed everything, burned the records, and pushed Christianity onto Norway. As I mentioned, he had his name legally changed to Varg. Now, Varg means wolf in Old Norse, and it is also sort of a reference to Lord of the Rings, which was wargs, the orc riders, these guys. But he also went by Grifi Grishnak, which is Lord Grishnak, and Grishnak was this guy, I believe, who was an orc commander in Lord of the Rings. And his band, Burzum, means darkness in Black speech, which is Mordor speech, which is from Lord of the Rings. So he likes Lord of the Rings. Another cool thing about Burzum is that it's all him. It is a one-man band. If you're listening to Burzum, you're more than likely listening to just this guy doing his thing. Now, Varg's hatred for Christian, coupled with the fact that Euronymous wanted black metal to invoke all these negative emotions like hatred and depression and anger, inspired Varg to take a stroll on down to the Fantov Church, built in 1150, and burn it down in 1992. Now, I'm all about protests. I'll go out on a limb and say, I'm okay with this. People will say that was not the time to protest. That is the exact time to protest. If you are against something, you need to get coverage. You need to be seen. And if you're on national television, that's when you're supposed to protest. I don't condone that at all. If there's something you don't like, then you should protest it. You should work against it. Otherwise, you shouldn't complain about it, because then you're just whining. I don't see this just... There's so many ways I could say how much I disagree with this, but bottom line is, it's just not good. I hate that he did that. I really do. I really hate that. After that, anywhere from 25 to 60 churches were burnt down by the Black Circle or by copycats of the Black Circle in Norway, just Norwegian churches. I didn't mention that. This is all taking place in Norway, and it's very compact. And it wasn't until this moment that things started being televised. This one little spot in the world was where black metal was taking place. And just now, people are now starting to see it. Black metal has now escaped the underground. It is now very much above ground. Later that year, the church burnings inspired Faust to stab a man to death, and Oystein congratulated him. Everyone did. Everyone in the Black Circle said good job. Now, Euronymous and Varg differed in the fact that Euronymous wanted to be low-key about this. He wanted to stay hidden. He didn't want black metal to be associated with this. He just wanted to make waves. Varg, however, wanted people to know that this was black metal's doing. And that led to Varg making the very rash and roughly bad decision to get an anonymous interview. A reporter went to his house, interviewed him, took pictures, wrote an article, and before the article was even published, Varg was arrested. Him and a couple other guys from the Black Circle were taken in to custody, but they were later released because they just didn't have enough evidence. This stunt was pulled so that Helvete would be pulling in more customers and the black metal movement would be getting more traction, getting more people under it, which was exactly what Euronymous did not want. One of the other aspects of black metal that I forgot to mention was that they did not want it to be a trend. They did not want a lot of people to know about it. The fact that I'm doing a video on it right now would probably make Euronymous sick to his stomach. So the fact that Varg did exactly what Euronymous didn't want him to do, Euronymous got very upset, and a lot of bad things started to happen. I think I failed to mention that Euronymous was living in Helvete. So was most of the Black Circle. Like Faust was living underneath something. Euronymous was living above him, and I think Varg was living on a couch in the back. I'm not sure. But after Helvete closed, Euronymous moved to an apartment in Oslo, in the same town as the record shop. But Varg moved to a different place. I think it was 400 or 500 kilometers away. I'm not sure where, but that number is sticking out to me. Literally from an interview from Varg. It should also be mentioned that Euronymous was all about image, but he was not really about action. He would praise people for doing the acts, but he would not commit the acts himself. So this would kind of earn him the reputation of being all talk and no bite, which would eventually kind of go against what some testimonials would be saying about him later. Euronymous hated Varg for what he did, for going to the reporters and getting the black metal movement so popular now. Hated him so much that among some of the buddies, he started making, petty threats. Like he was going to knock him out or tase him, stun him with a stun gun he had, and make a snuff film out of torturing him to death in the woods. Now, this coupled with the fact that he did not do much in the Black Circle. He participated in maybe one of the many church burnings, did not kill anybody, barely helped with selling records at Helvete. Euronymous was not a big part of what was going on while still being a founding father of the whole situation. Eventually, Varg heard about this threat, and shortly after hearing about it, he received a letter in the mail from Euronymous with a contract saying, hey, this contract will relinquish all rights from Burzum, from my label, to you. I keep forgetting to mention little things like that. Oh my god. I'm so sorry. Euronymous had a record label called Death Like Silence. Death Like Silence. He had the record label, and Burzum was signed under the record label. And when the Falling Out came out, they blew off some steam. Euronymous supposedly chilled out and sent a contract over to Varg saying, when you sign this contract, the rights to Burzum's music will all belong to you now. It'll no longer be a part of Death Like Silence. Euronymous just wanted to meet up and sign the contracts and be done with it. Varg saw that as a threat. So Varg got himself a knife, got his buddy to drive him over to Oslo, which was 400 to 500 kilometers away. Went up to his apartment at 3 or 4 in the morning. A fight broke out, and eventually Varg chased Euronymous down the stairs and stabbed Euronymous to death. Now, in Varg's words, he said that Euronymous was all bark and no bite. But he also said that he received a threat from Euronymous through someone else and killed him in premeditated self-defense. I mean, you can't get more backwards than that. He had a defense saying that, yeah, like, he told everyone else this, but he only told a few individuals about the threat towards his life, so he must have meant it. Come on, man. No. Varg tried to escape, but he was eventually arrested and charged for arson for, I believe, 3 church burnings, the murder of Euronymous, and possession of explosives. He was sentenced to 21 years in prison in Norway. Now, 21 is the maximum sentence in Norway. That is the most you can get before you're just released. You can get time added on if you keep doing bad stuff, but 21 is the maximum. I'm not sure when, but at some point he was granted, he was able to leave at some point, and he didn't come back. And when they finally found him, he had a new passport. He had a lot of things that were going to eventually get him out of Norway. But they found him and got him back to prison, and they added a year onto his time. 13 months, but pretty much a year. So now it's 22 years and a month, but he still got out after being in prison for 15 years because of parole. Mayhem went on without Euronymous. They're still making music to this day, but it doesn't exactly sound like what they used to do. Varg produced 3 albums in prison, 2 of which were recorded in prison, and I believe wrote 2 books and was released 15 years after receiving his 21-year sentence. Varg, being the former Norwegian nationalist, moved to France and changed his name to Louis Cachet. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right because it's French. Christian Vikernes, Varg Vikernes, Griffy Glishnak, and finally, Louis. I kind of stole that joke from Gonelak, I'm sorry. Him and his wife were arrested in 2013 for inciting racial hatred, which is a fun thing for Burzum fans to look past. He's a neo-Nazi, and I hope you weren't looking forward to listening to his music. Now that was a bit of a joke. You can listen to whoever you want to. You can separate art from the artist. I do that all the time. I can listen to Burzum's music and not really feel guilt, especially for the fact that I usually only listen to his music on YouTube through unofficial accounts, not uploaded by Burzum, so that he can't get paid for it. Gil Nagel, also known as Fenriz, kept doing his own thing during this whole situation with, Helveta and all that. He was in Darkthrone. Now, there wasn't a solo project, but he was a very avid member of it. I'm pretty sure he was the only consistent member of the band. But he does have a solo project called Isengard. I'm not sure when it started, but there's some more Lord of the Rings stuff for you. If you ask me, this whole thing is shrouded in mystery. All of this I just told you could be absolute shit, but it's not. I just don't have all of the 100% correct information. And no one does, honestly, at this point. Fenriz, Varg, Necrobutcher, and Hellhammer all have pretty much roughly the same transparency due to the documentary in, I believe, 2008 called Until the Light Takes Us. Beyond that, though, it's a lot of he said, they said, she said, he's dead. If this subject matter intrigued you, don't feel bad about that, because it's morbid, yeah, but I mean, it's interesting, because I was interested enough. I bought a patch for one of these albums. Varg is on this album. Euronymous is on this album. Pella's lyrics are on this album. So, yeah, here's the album, by the way. You can't really read it from here, but there it is. But like I said, if this interested you at all, there's a movie on Hulu called Lords of Chaos. If you ask me, it's a good movie. It has some cringy moments in it, but that's what music is. That's what black metal is. It's cringy if you're outside of it, Now, before you watch it, I just want to make sure you know that there is some misinformation. For example, it glorifies Euronymous, makes him look like a good guy. He was not the good guy. There were very few, if any, good guys in this situation. It also made anyone who wasn't Varg, Pella, or Euronymous look like a mindless follower, which they weren't. And it didn't even have Fenriz in it. It doesn't have all the facts, but I was thoroughly entertained by it. I mean, I think it's a great movie. It's a little dark, so like I said, it's watch at your discretion, but if you're interested, give it a watch. There's not a lot of metalhead media out there either, so I think I'm just, grabbing onto whatever I can. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask in the comments. I'll do my best to try and answer them. I'm also going to try my best to link as many bands as possible that were linked to all of this hell. But like I said, I'd recommend that you listen to Presume using unofficial accounts on YouTube, just so you're not directly supporting Varg, even though you're only going to give him like a couple pennies. So it's not that big a deal. I mean, it's just music. I hope you enjoyed this fun and lighthearted video. I'm your host, Roach, and thank you for tuning in once again to Roach Radio. Have a good night.